Welcome back to Spilling Tea, the podcast where we unpack life's messiest moments, hardest lessons, and most surprisingly, inspiring comebacks. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever had one of those moments where life changes so fast that it feels like someone swapped out the script while you were still reading the first act? One day, everything seems fine. You have a plan, a routine, a vision for your future. And then suddenly, a relationship ends, a job disappears, a friendship falls apart, a dream you've spent years chasing collapses, and you're left staring at the pieces wondering, okay, now what? Today, we're talking about something almost nobody volunteers for, but nearly everybody experiences at some point. What happens when your life completely falls apart? Because here's the tea. Sometimes the chapter that nearly breaks you becomes the chapter that introduces you to yourself. Today's conversation was inspired by one of my favorite themes from The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel on Prime Video. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. You will laugh loudly, like belly laughs. The kind of laughs that just make you feel good. We're going to look at why some people seem to rise from the ashes while others stay stuck. The fascinating psychology behind what's called post-traumatic growth, and why reinvention is often less about becoming someone new and more about discovering who you've been all along. So grab your coffee, your iced tea, your emotional support snack, and let's talk about one of life's hardest and most unexpected gifts: reinventing yourself after life falls apart. Let's start with Midge Maisel. Midge appears to have the perfect life. She is beautiful. She's funny. She's married with 2 healthy kids. She cooks a mean brisket and appears basically on all surfaces to be living the American dream. Everything is polished, everything is organized, and Instagram worthy before Instagram even existed. Then one night, her husband Joel decides he's leaving her for another woman. Penny Pan! Not exactly the kind of surprise that comes with balloons and cake. Her entire identity gets blown apart. Suddenly, she's not the perfect wife anymore, not the woman with the perfect future, not the person she thought she was. She's devastated, humiliated, and lost. And in one of her lowest moments, she gets completely schnockered, grabs a microphone, and starts venting on stage. And guess what? She's hilarious. That accidental meltdown becomes the beginning of a completely new life and career for her. Now, obviously, Midge is fictional, but the reason that story resonates so deeply is because it reflects something very real. A lot of people discover who they truly are only after circumstances force them to. Think about that. If Joel hadn't left, would Midge have become a comedian? Maybe not. She was comfortable, and to be honest, comfortable isn't always bad, but comfort can sometimes hide parts of ourselves we've never explored. The thing about life-changing setbacks is they don't just take things away, they also remove excuses. That doesn't mean the pain was worth it. Let's be clear, heartbreak is still heartbreak, and betrayal still hurts. No one should be grateful for getting their heart stomped on like a grape in a winery. But sometimes growth sneaks in through those cracks. And sometimes what breaks isn't just our life. Sometimes it's a mask. Think about Midge for a second. Before Joel left, she wasn't just living a certain life. She was living a certain identity. The perfect wife, the perfect mother, the woman with the perfect future, the woman who seemed to have everything figured out. And honestly, most of us can relate to that. maybe not the 1950s dresses and the flawless brisket, but the identity part. Because somewhere along the way, we all learn to wear masks. Not because we're fake, but because we're human. We learn which parts of ourselves gets approval, which parts of ourselves get praise and acceptance. So we become the peacemaker, the overachiever, the strong one, the caretaker, the person who always says, I'm fine, even when we're not absolutely fine. We get so comfortable playing those roles that eventually they start feeling like who we are. Then life happens. A relationship ends, a job disappears, a dream falls apart, a friendship changes, and suddenly we're not just grieving what we lost. We're struggling with a much bigger question. Who am I without it? That's part of what makes major life transitions so painful. It's not just the loss of circumstances, it's the loss of identity. The version of yourself you've been carrying around for years suddenly doesn't fit anymore. And as painful as that can be, sometimes life removes a mask we never would have taken off on our own. Which brings us to a fascinating question. Why do some people rebuild after a setback and discover a stronger version of themselves while others remain stuck in the rubble? Now, here's the $1 million question. Why do some people experience a devastating setback and eventually thrive while others stay stuck for years? Let's spill some psychology tea, my favorite kind of tea. Most people assume resilience is a personality trait, like people are either born strong or weak. But that's not what researchers have found, and I'd love to share that with you. Researchers found that resilience is largely a collection of skills, habits, and thoughts. So in other words, it's not magic, it's practice. When something terrible happens to you, every person starts creating a story about it. The event is painful, but the story often determines what happens next. Person A gets dumped and thinks, nobody will ever love me again. I'm broken. Person B gets dumped and thinks, that was awful, but maybe I deserve something better. Same event, different story, very different future. One of the biggest differences between people who grow after setbacks and people who stay stuck is how they interpret adversity. The people who eventually thrive don't deny reality. They don't pretend everything is fine. No, they acknowledge the pain, but they also believe the situation can teach them something, and that belief changes everything. And interestingly, this idea isn't just found in psychology. It's all over scripture too. One of the best examples is Joseph in the Old Testament. If anybody had a reason to give up, it was Joseph. He was betrayed by his own brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and forgotten in prison. At multiple points, his life looked completely off track. But what makes Joseph remarkable isn't that bad things didn't happen to him. It is that he refused to let those things become the final chapter of his story. Years later, he says something incredibly powerful. He said, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. And think about that for a second. He didn't say the betrayal was good. He didn't say the suffering was good. He said God was able to bring good out of it. And honestly, that's a distinction a lot of us need to hear. Because sometimes we're so focused on asking, why is this happening to me? That we never stop to ask, what can come from this? That's where growth begins. Because if you think there's no future, you stop investing in one. But if you think there might be something on the other side of the pain, you keep moving forward. Slowly, especially slowly. And can we talk about the trap of wanting your old life back? A lot of people secretly spend years trying to get back to a version of life that no longer exists, and I completely get it. After a crisis, your brain desperately wants certainty. It wants things back to the way they were because there's some comfort in there. The old relationship, the old job, the old routine, the old identity. We tell ourselves, I just want things to go back to normal. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes your life doesn't need restoration. It needs reinvention. That's much harder to hear because restoration is familiar to you. It's comfortable. Reinvention requires stepping outside of your comfort zone. It requires courage. And sometimes the old life that we're trying so desperately to get back wasn't actually healthy for us in the first place. Maybe it was built on overextending ourselves and saying yes when we meant no, keeping everyone comfortable while quietly exhausting ourselves. Maybe we were carrying responsibilities that were never ours to carry in the first place. Maybe we were so busy meeting everyone else's expectations that we lost sight of our own needs. We call it kindness, and sometimes it is kindness. But sometimes it's fear wearing a very nice outfit. Because people-pleasing often looks generous on the outside while creating resentment on the inside. So when life falls apart, we assume our goal should be rebuilding exactly what we had before. But, like I mentioned earlier, what if normal wasn't actually working? What if the version of you before the disaster wasn't your final form? Stay with me. Many people discover strengths they never knew existed because a difficult experience forced them to develop them. Nobody registers for the trauma gym voluntarily. Nobody's like, I'll take one betrayal, please. I'd love some character development today. Fun fact, though, challenges often reveal capacities we didn't know we had in the first place, like leadership, creativity, confidence, independence, empathy, boundaries. And let's be honest, some of us didn't learn boundaries until life repeatedly hit us over the head with a frying pan. Okay, let's get nerdy because you know how I love to get into the psychology and how the mind works. Because there is a concept in psychology called post-traumatic growth. And no, it's not pretending that trauma is wonderful. Trauma is definitely not wonderful. But this theory simply suggests that some people experience positive psychological changes after highly challenging events. Researchers have identified several common areas where growth occurs, and I wanted to go through a few of them with you, so let's break them down. Number one, greater personal strength. People often discover they're stronger than they originally thought, which is a good thing. You survive something impossible, and suddenly other challenges don't seem quite as intimidating to you. Number two, improved relationships. Many people become more selective about who they allow into their lives. I actually related the most to this one. Your friendships deepen. Your relationships become more genuine. You're less interested in small talk and more interested in real connection. Number three, new possibilities. And this one is huge. Sometimes trauma forces you off a path you never would have left voluntarily. And that opens doors you never would have noticed before, like maybe new careers or hobbies, traveling, going to new places, maybe tapping into those dreams. Many people also report a greater appreciation for everyday life and a deeper understanding of what truly matters. Now, there are always two sides to every coin. So I want to talk about the other side of the coin on this dynamic, because sometimes people don't grow after setbacks. They remain trapped. And we want to look at why. So in preparing for this episode, I found a few common reasons. First, we become attached to an identity. When we lose something significant, we're often losing more than circumstances. We're losing a story that we've told ourselves about who we are. Maybe you've been the successful one, the caretaker, the dependable one. And when those roles change, it's easy to wonder, who am I now? The challenge isn't simply recovering what was lost, it's learning to write a new chapter. Not overnight, not perfectly, just one page at a time. Second, we avoid grieving. People get stuck because they try to skip the hard part. Listen carefully. Healing is not bypassing, and growth is not pretending. You cannot speed run heartbreak. Trust me, I've tried. Your emotions will collect their payment eventually. The healthiest people don't avoid grief. They move through it. They cry, they rage, they journal, they pray. The point is, they allow themselves to feel the loss instead of pretending it never happened. You can't heal from something that you're unwilling to acknowledge. Third, we attach our worth to other people's approval. Sometimes we're not just grieving what we lost, we're grieving the validation that came with it. Maybe people admired us for our success, our relationship, our reliability, our ability to always have it together. Then life changes and suddenly we find ourselves asking, will people still value me now? And that's a scary question because there's nothing wrong with enjoying appreciation. The problem comes when we depend on it. One of the most freeing lessons I've learned is that your worth cannot be tied to a role you might lose. Jobs change, relationships change, titles change, seasons change, but your value as a person does not. Real growth begins when you realize that losing part of your story doesn't mean you've lost yourself. So let's say life has handed you an absolute mess. The relationship ended, the dream collapsed, the job disappeared. The life you planned no longer looks anything like the life you're living. Now what? The good news is that reinvention doesn't happen all at once. It's usually a series of small decisions repeated over time. And before we talk about how to do it, I think we need to clear up one common misunderstanding. A lot of people think reinvention means becoming an entirely different person, but often the healthiest transformations aren't about becoming somebody new. They're about becoming more of who you really were all along. Think about Midge Maisel. She didn't become a different person after her life fell apart. She became more honest, more courageous, more authentic, more herself. And that's true for many of us. Sometimes life strips away the roles, expectations, and assumptions we've been carrying around for years. What's left isn't a stranger, it's the real you. So how do we start uncovering that beautiful person? Step one, stop waiting to feel ready. That is a big one. Nobody ever feels ready for anything. The people you admire, not ready. The entrepreneur, not ready. The author, not ready. The comedian, definitely not ready. We tend to think confidence comes first and action comes second. But most of the time, it's the other way around. Confidence is usually the result of action, not the prerequisite. Step two, experiment. Stop treating every decision like it's permanent. Try new things, take a class, start a project, apply for a job that you never would have thought you would have applied for. Take some trips. I know that's what I'm doing. I'm going to Maine in the fall and I can't wait. Meet new people, learn a skill. The pressure to have everything figured out can be paralyzing, but you don't need a 5-year plan right now. You just need information. Think of yourself as a scientist conducting experiments. Some things will work and some won't work. Both outcomes teach you something valuable. Step 3, build tiny wins. When life falls apart, huge goals can feel overwhelming. So don't start with huge goals. Start with small victories. Get out of bed. Go for a walk. Update your resume. Read one chapter in a book. Make the phone call you've been avoiding. Tiny wins may not look impressive from the outside, but they rebuild something incredibly important. Trust in yourself. And self-trust is often the foundation of reinvention. Step 4, rewrite the narrative. One of the most powerful things you can change is the story you're telling yourself. Ask yourself, what if this isn't the ending? What if this is the beginning of a different story? Not necessarily a better story, just a different one. Because different can be powerful. Different can introduce you to opportunities you never would have found otherwise. Different can reveal strengths that you never knew you even had. Step 5, find meaning. Research and what I have found consistently shows that people cope better with adversity when they're able to find meaning in their experiences. Not justification, not denial, but meaning. And there's a difference. The goal isn't to convince yourself that what happened was good. The goal is to ask, what did I learn? How did I grow? What matters now that didn't matter before? Who am I becoming because of this experience? Those questions create forward momentum. Because when you find meaning, you stop focusing exclusively on what was lost and start paying attention to what's being built. And often that's where reinvention begins, not when your circumstances change, but when your perspective does. You know, I love social media. There's a lot of good and a lot of bad to it, but here is definitely something that social media gets wrong every time. We love comeback stories, but we usually skip the messy middle. We see the before, the after, and we see that beautiful glow up. We see success. We see standing ovations. But what we don't see is the crying, the confusion, the uncertainty, the random Tuesday where someone questions every decision they've ever made in their life. Growth is not linear. It's messy. You'll have good weeks. You'll have bad weeks. You'll have progress, setbacks, moments where you feel unstoppable, moments where you stare into your refrigerator wondering why you're there. And that's normal. Reinvention isn't one grand dramatic moment. It's usually hundreds of small decisions, tiny choices made consistently over time. I'm about to get vulnerable and share a little personal tea with you for just a minute. One thing that I have learned is that rock bottom introduces you to people in a way success never does. Some people show up with a ladder, some people show up with snacks, and some people pull up a chair like they're waiting for the season finale and wondering if you're ever going to get your life together. And I know what that feels like. There was a season in my life when everything seemed to be falling apart, and it became pretty clear that at least one person had already written the ending to my story in their head. They were so certain of that ending that they actually told people in my own family and my close circle of friends that I wouldn't be able to survive without them. Now listen, confidence is a wonderful quality. We love confidence. But there's a very fine line between confidence and believing you're personally responsible for another adult's ability to function. Looking back, I think they genuinely believed they were the reason for every good thing in my life. They thought they were the main character in my story. But the funny thing is, they completely underestimated the real main character, Me. You know that feeling when someone looks at your lowest moment and quietly decides that's as far as you're ever going to go. That one right there. And for a little while, if I'm being honest, I almost believed it. Because when you're hurting and you're rebuilding and you're trying to figure out who you are after life knocks the wind out of you, self-doubt gets really loud. But here's what nobody tells you about rebuilding your life. Sometimes the people around you become more comfortable with your limitations than your potential. Let that sink in for a second. Some people get attached to the version of you that was struggling, the version that was scared, the version that was easier to overlook. What they don't plan for is the growth. What they don't plan for is the healing. And what they definitely don't plan for is you finding your voice and refusing to make yourself smaller anymore. One thing rebuilding teaches you is who actually belongs in your life. Because when you stop performing, some people leave, but others, they lean in. I like those. The people meant for your life aren't attracted to your performance. They're attracted to your truth. And that's one of the unexpected gifts of starting over. You find out who's holding on to a role you played and who's genuinely invested in you. And honestly, that's why this topic hits so close to home for me. Because some of the hardest lessons of my life became the foundation for some of the best things in my life. They taught me resilience. They taught me confidence. They taught me that I could survive things I once thought would break me. And in a very real way, those lessons led me right here to this microphone, to this podcast, to this conversation with all of you. If everything had gone according to my original plan, I'd probably be doing something completely different right now. Isn't it funny how life works? The experiences that had me crying in my car at one point eventually became the experiences that gave me something meaningful to say. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't have to convince people that you've changed. You don't have to send progress reports. You don't have to stand outside their window holding a boombox and a PowerPoint presentation called Reasons You Should Have Believed in Me. You just keep building. You keep healing. You keep growing. Because sooner or later, your life starts telling you the story for you. And sometimes the chapter that nearly broke you becomes the chapter that finally introduces you to yourself. And I love that for you. So, in our wrap up, let's bring it back to Midge Maisel. The thing that makes her story powerful isn't that she got betrayed. It's what she did afterward. The betrayal wasn't the victory. The reinvention was the victory. And that's true for all of us. We don't get to control every loss, every ending, every disappointment. I wish we could, but we just don't. But what we do get to decide is what happens next. Maybe you're listening today from the middle of a breakup, or you lost your job, another setback, a dream that didn't quite work out. If so, I want you to remember this. Lean into me, my friends. The person you were before this event happened is not the only version of you that can exist. There are still strengths that you haven't even discovered yet. There are still opportunities you haven't even seen. And there are still chapters that haven't been written. Not because suffering is magical. Not because pain is fun. Absolutely not. But because human beings are remarkably capable of rebuilding. And maybe that's why I love the words of Psalm 139, verse 14. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. For those of us who draw strength from faith, it's a reminder that our worth was never dependent on a relationship, a job title, a dream, or someone else's approval. We were created with value before any of those things entered our story. That's the beauty of reinvention. You aren't becoming someone completely different. You're uncovering more of the person you were created to be. So perhaps the better question isn't, am I enough? Maybe the better question is, what if I've been enough all along? Not perfect, not finished, not without scars, but enough to start again, enough to heal, rebuild, and take the next step. And if Midge can turn a public meltdown into a comedy career, maybe your current disaster isn't the end of your story either. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today and spending the time with me on Spilling Tea. If this episode encouraged you, share it with a friend who needs a reminder that setbacks aren't always stop signs. Sometimes they're just detours. And sometimes, surprisingly, the detour leads you somewhere better. Until next time, keep moving forward, stay brave, and remember, the tea may be hot, but your comeback can be way hotter. I'm your host, Colleen. Thank you and good night. Mwah.